defending his PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, and was a student, what we would call a student extern at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and just knows a lot about REDCap, mostly from, you know, trial and error, teaching yourself, which is always the best, and has incorporated it in all of his research. Yeah, and has got his, he was just telling me, his postdoc at the University of Kansas in the Department of Psychology. So there's going to be a cross-pollination, cross-training in speech pathology, voice and emotion, which is awesome. So anyways, yeah, so he was the first person that I called to streamline this for us. I think everyone has probably been on REDCap, and there are a gazillion videos and podcasts and, you know, written documents of how to start. And I'll speak for myself. It was overwhelming for me. So what we talked about is basically streamlining and helping us create a database. And we're going to kind of use the SLP clinic as a starting point for clinical-based research and online surveys. So no more Survey Monkey. So enough with me. Brett, take it away.
Wonderful, thank you. That comment also reminded me that I had a pros and cons of the having one unified database.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah. I am gonna guess most people don't want to start there, so we can talk about that later. But yeah, hi, my name is Brett. Really excited to be here. This is gonna be really informal. I have spent many hours on REDCap learning how to use it, and believe me, it is powerful. It is not user friendly, which is the most unfortunate part. So my goal today is really just to, from the ground up, walk you through everything. It might feel like drinking from a fire hose right now, but I want, hopefully by seeing it and how I work through everything once, and you start to click around, things will make more sense. I think one of the best ways to kind of get into the REDCap thing is just to realize the terminology it uses. And so I've written this guide here that kind of will say, like, okay, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create a survey. Well, a survey is an instrument within a project within REDCap. So all that to say, I will pass this around, but this is going to be pretty much the format we're going through. So once, you'll have this as a reference guide after the presentation, but if you're like, oh, I need to figure out how to create a new instrument, you can just click on this and it'll take you straight to that part of the walkthrough. But this is going to be our guide today. This is also really informal. Feel free to pop into the chat. Jackie, do you mind watching the chat for me?
Yep.
Or just unmute and say, Brett, I have a question. I'm happy to, again, just kind of answer everything. But all right, so you are in REDCap and you're going to start a project. Projects you can think of as one unified survey, right? And so we create a new one, and this will be, I do a lot of voice and psych, so voice and psych project, right? And anything, I can say this is just practice, so I'll say that for now. But when you do get an actual research project up and running, you'll have to put the PI, email, all this information. The IRB, REDCap will want an IRB number on file if it is used to collect data under an IRB. You don't need an IRB number first. You can set up the REDCap. Usually the IRB wants to see what you're going to ask people. So I make the REDCap first and then send it to the IRB, get approval, and then I take the IRB number and put it back into REDCap. But so you can fill out this information here. For now, I'm just going to say it's for practice. So I will create that. And all right, this is what you're going to see. And right now, there's not a whole lot. This is the main project setup page. More often than not, you're probably going to use REDCap for a survey. You don't have to. If you are collecting data on paper and pencil forms and you want a secure place to store those data, you could build a REDCap that would not be a survey, but could just be a storage place for your data. But again, more often than not, I use it as a survey. And in order to use it as a survey, you have to click enable as a survey. Otherwise, you can't have surveys. So just a weird little quirk with REDCap. longitudinal options. I'll go more in the guide about this, but if you are, there's the longitudinal data collection with defined events, which means I know each participant's going to be asked the same question 3 times. And I know that those 3 times that we ask are going to be 3 weeks apart. Like, you have to know that ahead of time if you want to use this longitudinal option. If you're going to ask participants at the beginning of every therapy session, we're going to ask them an anxiety measure, and they might have 3 therapy sessions, they might have 10 therapy sessions. Then you want to enable the repeating instruments instead. It just means they can fill out this instrument multiple times, and we don't have to set boundaries around how many times. But again,
Hey,
just kind of getting ahead of my, yeah.
Brett, I do have a question. I do remember you or someone saying at UPMC that make sure that you love your database, love it, because once you lock it down, it's like never to go back. You can't go in and modify it. Am I right? So you can test it and test it and test it, but once it's in, yeah.
So yes, that there are safeguards in place to prevent things just being changed haphazardly. So as you see, each of these module, like kind of squares in this project setup, these are kind of thinking like the steps, right? So first I'm going to set all the settings. All right, I've set up the title, the purpose. I'm going to use surveys. I can click this button. I'm done. Check, we're good to go. Now I can start to design things and everything. And I'm kind of moving through this. And then this is like test your project thoroughly. So this is up to you. You really need to test this, and then click I'm done. And then moving it to production status. And this is the last step. And once you're in production status, it means I've tested everything. Everything's good to go. We are going to start collecting data right now. And when you click that, it'll say, do you want to keep all the data you've saved so far? So this is like all your testing data. Maybe you floated it out to a subsample, like to 5 test participants who are real participants, but you were just kind of making sure it worked. Then you would say, no, I want those data. I don't want to delete those, right? But okay, you have this option. Now, I'll say once you are in production status, you cannot go back without approval. And let me show you an example actually of one that is in production status, my dissertation. So yeah, like if I'm at UPMC lesions here, this is in production status. So if I go to edit anything, I'm not allowed to edit any of this information right now. I can't change a question. I can't add a new question. I can't say, oh, there was a typo. This is kind of final thing. However, you can say draft mode. And if I do say, oh, there was a typo, or, oh, I didn't score that question correctly, I can enter in draft mode. And then it will keep track of everything that I change. And now I can go in and I can make whatever changes to the project. But every change that I made will be submitted for review. So basically there's guardrails in place to prevent you from just haphazardly changing things. If something comes up, and there's usually an automated process. So if like text is changed, so again, like a typo, it'll be approved automatically. But if you start moving questions around and add new questions, there's the REDCAP administrator will actually have to go and say, yes, this checks out. They might contact you and say, why did you get rid of this question or this questionnaire or whatever? So once you're in production status, you really want to make sure it is good to go. Otherwise, there are like approval steps. You can't just go and edit things.
And those approval steps, when you say our administrator, that is a local administrator, or is that a Vanderbilt, like REDCAP
nope,
administrator?
It's all local. So it'll be a Carlow REDCAP administrator.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But so how do we even get to production status, right? Well, just as a quick orientation, if you want to see all of your projects, you can click here. That kind of takes you back to the home screen. Within each project, you have the home, the designer, dictionary, etc. And here is the options, like once you've started collecting data, and then other applications you can do. First thing you'll want to do once you have it set up is go to user rights and make sure that people have right access to things. I like to actually create a role. So I could say project manager, right? And I'll create this role, and it'll say, well, what do you want this person have, or this role to have access to? And I'll say, well, this person should be able to create and design setup, otherwise they can't edit anything. They should have complete access to user rights. Otherwise, if we add in a new user, they can't give them privileges. And this is also an area, if you have like a research assistant who you don't want to be able to change things around, they shouldn't be able to delete records and give other people permission, et cetera, right? So you kind of figure this out with each project. Personally, I like to just select everything. If I'm the one who's saying I'm in control of this project, I don't use the mobile app, so I don't do that. But I can create records, I can rename them, and I can delete them. Again, if for someone who's a research assistant, I don't give them the delete option. I'll say rename it, and that way, if they enter in something or they catch an error, they can go in and rename the record 10 to record delete. And then we know, like, okay, this needs to be deleted, but again, there's oversight and checks in place to make sure that someone didn't accidentally delete data that we need.
Got it.
Yeah, so as you create your forms, they'll populate here, but right now I'm going to create this role, and then I will assign myself. So click here, and you can either do privileges by user, but again, I don't like that because it could vary if you have several people on a project. So I like to create the roles, so like project manager or research assistant, and then assign them. And now I have been granted all of the privileges associated with project manager.
Got it.
And it also, if there's something like you're seeing a piece of the guide, or it says do this or do that, and you're like, I don't see that option on my menu, it's probably because you don't have privilege to that, and you need to go and make sure you have access to that privilege. But all right, so we have the user rights set up, and then we'll click project setup here, or in designer rather. Click on the designer thing, and here's form 1, which is a generic thing that's created. And I'm going to show you this here because there's only one variable, and it's record ID. This record ID variable is not viewable to any of the participants. No one sees it. It's just REDCAP's way of automatically tracking record entries. And so I'll return to the list of instruments, and let's say I want to do an anxiety scale. So I click create. So I know I'm going to do an anxiety scale, and then I'm going to say I also know I want to do a voice scale. So I could either add the instrument here or here. I'll do it in between just to show you voice scale. And as you can see, there are no fields within either of these. But if I were to move the voice scale first, you'll see that the record ID field is now, it is always going to be the very first field at whatever is first.
All right.
And the form 1 didn't have anything in there, and so I actually want to delete that. I'm going to click choose action and delete. Yes, I'll delete that. And there we go. Or first, actually, we probably need a what are they called? Not a waiver, a consent form. What is it called?
Yes.
Consent form. So I could create that if I want to distribute the survey online. Here.
Okay.
Right. So now we have this consent form. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to click add field, and I want to choose what type of field. So if it's a text box, notes box, you have all these different options. Since I need to tell them what the consent form, or this, so you are about to take a survey. If you want to quit, right? And I have to make a variable name, so we could say consent info. This is just a text box, so there's no answer associated with it. It's not an identifier. It doesn't really matter if I say it's required or not because the person's not adding any information. I'll click save. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Not the notes box. I want to do descriptive text. See, again, I've been doing REDCAP for like almost 6 years at this point, and I still make these little flubs. And it's because you would think it would be nice. The descriptive text allows you, if you want to embed media, so if you want to upload a photo as part of your survey, or an example photo or something, you can upload files within a field label here. But yeah, so again, it's not required. This is the information, and then I could say, I could have a yes, no option. Do you consent to participate? And this will be consent.
Brett?
Yes.
Brett. This is Sam DeLessio. I'm also in the SLP department as chair. I do have a question about the consents. So if you're not doing a survey and you have consents for a project that have been approved through IRB, can you use REDCap as a repository to store those consents?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and are you talking about like an actual informed consent document with like a signed that they
Yeah,
sign?
like your participant consents in any project, research project that you would have. It's been passed through the IRB, and now you have participants. Obviously, there is, information from the participant. So I know that REDCap is HIPAA compliant. Is there a way to just use that as a repository to store your consent forms from your research project? You don't have a survey, it's maybe a different statistical, a different research design. You just want to store the consents from the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. That is helpful, and I will. I'm just going to do it in here to show you, because there is the option to have a file upload. So where users upload file, right? And so you would say uploaded forms or something. This is a scenario, if I'm understanding, where you have a research assistant, you have a stack of consent forms, and you're like, I just want to get these out of my file drawer. I want them to be electronic.
Right.
And so you would have a research assistant go into REDCap, and then whenever if I go to designer, consent form, or survey distribution tools here. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but basically, yes. And instead of handing out this survey to people as like a fill out the survey, you would just have the participant go, and you could say like, what was the participant's first name, or your research assistant would go through and fill out this form multiple times, right? So participant number 1, first name, Kathy, email address, this, and then you scan in the form into a PDF, and then you can click upload file, browse that file, store it in REDCap, hit submit, and then now REDCap views that form. It'll have that as like a record ID within REDCap, but you could have separate fields for like the name of the participant, their phone number, their last name, et cetera, because it is HIPAA compliant. And that way, if you want to say, what was Sam Smith's phone number, I can query REDCap and find Sam Smith, find phone number, I need to call him for whatever reason.
And moving forward, though, we can put our consents electronically into REDCap and just have them do it themselves, like right there. But this is just for the old consents.
Yeah, like I would say going forward, you would be able to electronically send out your consents, but if you have paper copies of consents that you want to just store and then get rid of the paper copy, this could be a repository for that. I'm assuming also data, any sort of data that you have associated with a research project, you could store on the system. And there's no maximum amount of data that there's no limit to your data that you're putting on there.
Not that I am aware of. I have not had any situation where it's been too big. It is used like both as a survey tool and as a data storage as well. So maybe that's something you would want to talk with the REDCap administrator about, just to double check, but I personally have not had any issues.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I kind of sped through a bunch of different things. If you want to use it as a survey, or in this case, you are having someone, take a form and fill out it electronically, and basically use it as a survey kind of portal. That's what I just showed you there. The alternative method would be, I could click record status dashboard, click add new record, and then I say, okay, which record, or like which scale am I going to enter? So if you have a paper copy of, a voice scale, an anxiety scale, and their consent form, and I want them all to be associated with participant number 2, I could say, all right, let me grab their consent form, click this, and then I'll fill out the information, I'll upload the file, I'll hit save and exit. And then I could say, all right, well, let's now go to the voice scale. And again, if you wanted to transfer it electronically, like item by item, if options 1 through 5, item number 1, they said 2, item number 2, they said 5, et cetera, or you could do the file upload and then scan it in. The limitation of that is you just now have a scanned PDF file to store it. You don't actually have the data in a way where you could export it into SPSS or anything like that. But the limitation of then manually transferring everything is maybe participant actually said question number 3 was a 1, and when I was clicking through it quickly to enter in the data, I entered in number 2, and that's just some human error. But back to the designer. So I have this consent form here. Now I'm going to do the voice scale. I'll add a field, and it'll be a calculated field, or not calculated field, a multiple choice with the radio button. You say, when does your voice hurt? And I'll do like voice hurt. The other thing is all of the variable names need to be distinct across the entire project. So even within instruments, so like a voice scale and anxiety scale, I can't say item 1 and the voice scale and then do item 1 in the anxiety scale. They need to be separate across each thing. So usually, you know, anxiety 1, anxiety 2, or whatever. And then I could say this is required. If you are having participants fill out identifiable information, name, phone number, address, anything like that, you can say yes. And this allows you to store it safely on the server. But then if you are going to download the data to analyze, you can export it and exclude all the identifying information. That way that file is still de-identified. Also, if you have like research assistants who don't need to know the contact information of people, you can say that the research assistant role doesn't have access to see identifiable information. So you just want to specify when it is or isn't. In terms of choosing answer choices, you always need a number, a comma, and then whatever you want that participant to see. So I could say morning, afternoon, 3 evening, something like that. And that will allow you to have a numerical value associated with each response, but the participant will only see whatever comes after the comma. Everything will need to have a numerical value, although things don't necessarily need to have a written response. So I could say copy field, and you'll see REDCAP actually automatically adds a 2 at the end, but I'll edit this and I could say, how much does it hurt? And I could do 0 to mean none. And then I could have like a 1 here with a blank, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I just want to go to 6 and I say extreme. Now this will appear like this to the participant. And so even though they'll click, oh, it's in the middle, REDCAP knows, oh, that's a 3, but the participant doesn't know that that number is there, right?
Brett, so
yes.
if you have a rarely, sometimes, often, same sort of deal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Okay,
and
so with all the like voice handicap index, all that kind of stuff, it's just got to be 1 comma, and then you would say, would you say rarely? No, you
yes.
would say 1 comma.
No, you would say rarely, because otherwise the participant's not going to see anything. And that's the thing, right. If I got rid of this, the participant's not going to know that this is none, they just see extreme. Gotcha. So you would want rarely, sometimes, often, never, right?
Got it.
The other thing I wanted to, talk about is these numbers doesn't matter. REDCAP doesn't care if you go in order, doesn't care if you you can do whatever you want with the numbers. It can be 999, and this might be if you have a question that's like a trick question where it's like, oh, is the sky red? Yes or no? And if they say yes, you could like code that as 999. So when you're looking at the data, you know that 999s are like trash data, we need to remove it. So again, you can add whatever you want here.
Okay, got it.
And yeah, that's basically this. The other option, so you would make each item across different measures, and or for each item within the scale. Or again, if it's like a background question, demographic question, you could have it all there. If you have a scale where all of the responses are the same across, so like again for the VHI-10, I could add a matrix of fields, which means each field, each item is going to be a row here, but I know all of the options are rarely, sometimes, rarely, sometimes, often, what,
Yeah, right.
very
Wait.
often,
Very often.
or never, I think it's almost always, something like that.
Yeah.
Almost always, and then always. And now I could say, people ask what's wrong with your voice. And then I have to give it a variable name. So, you know, VHI1, I could say it's required. The annotation is just additional information. So like, please know that we are, you know, just if you want to add extra information, I don't know, go for the participant and we say, my voice gives out, it hurts when I talk, something like that. And then again, specific variable names for each one. And REDCap will tell you if it's like, hey, that variable has been used 5 pages from now, it'll flag it for you. With a matrix, you do have to give it a group name. So I could say VHI matrix. And then I could say, do I want it to be a single answer button where each question, they only get one option, or multiple answers? So you know, basically each column will be a variable, and then you could select multiple columns for the same question. But so for a radio button, and then a matrix will appear like this. So this is really helpful whenever you know all of
yeah.
the items are the same across the scale. That'll be the matrix field option, or do each one individually. What questions so far? I know, again, running a mile a minute.
No questions in the chat. Well, which one do you suggest? I'm kind of liking the matrix when, you know, because most of these questionnaires are like that.
I prefer the matrix one because I think it's easier for participants to answer. Right. However, a big caveat is the text is a little condensed. So if you're wanting the text to be more easily readable, I would recommend to have each individual item. Again, the matrix option is nice when all the answers are the same. The other downside and thing you have to be careful with the matrix option is that all of the responses are the same. So in the case of, if I were to do a reverse scored question, my voice never hurts. And then I could say never, never, sometimes, you know, 3, almost always, 4, always. Well, we don't want someone to say my voice never hurts always. That will give them a 4, which is a higher score, like my voice is hurting more, right? So what we would do instead is we would say, well, this response is a 1, this response is a 2, this response is a 3, and this response is a 4. So this would be a reversed coded item. Obviously the language would be really confusing. It's a terrible item, don't use it. Voice hurting. But you cannot do that with a matrix of fields, right? I can only say there is one set of directionality of the responses, which means if there are items within a scale that are reverse scored, I can't just take the sum score. I have to manually go and say item 4 needs to be reversed, item 7 needs to be reversed.
Oh my gosh, and that's exactly what happened with us, remember? We didn't know that, and then you came on and it was like, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
And so like that, the reverse scoring is one of the most common mistakes I've seen just in my own projects and just like around, because often, you know, even if you're making item by item, it's really easy to say, I'm going to copy that field. It automatically renames it. I just enter in a different question. I like ice cream. You know, whatever scale, and then there's going to be items where I never change the responses. So even though the responses need to be reversed, they're not, or vice versa. I do reverse score it, and then I forget that the next question is normally scored, and then now all the items are reverse scored. So this is one of the biggest areas that can trip people up. But that's a matrix.
You just do it as a regular survey then, no matrix then.
No, you can. You just need to remember. And so, so I did a matrix for this personality question, and I literally put it in the title so that I know when I export the data, this is all in a matrix, but it's like to even tell myself, this is not reverse scored, Brett. You have to go in and manually say which items need to be. Again, it's more work for me on the back end, but I would want again, it's condenser. It looks cleaner in my own personal preference. Now, in terms of what are you using for, entirely up to you. But if you wanted to, for instance, do a calculated field, where I could say, you know, VHI total, and then I could say VHI total. Here's where you create an equation. So I could do, you know, VHI 1 plus VHI 2, right? And I could do that. But then if I just add in the variables and there are things that need to be reverse scored, now the total score is wrong. So what you'd have to do instead is to do something like 4 minus VHI 3, and then that would allow, so this is, you know, however many responses, you know, minus that, and that way the 4 is now equal to 1, and I guess it'd be 5 minus, but vice versa. So you could do this, but again, you just have to make sure that happens, because otherwise the calculated score will be wrong. And this will basically, depending on what a person responds to, it will populate with their total here.
Okay.
All
right. Oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, we have a question by Clara. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of it, but I was wondering, is it possible to conduct random assignments in REDCAP? And 2, if there are branching options within the survey?
So random assignments, do you mean people will be given different questionnaires in different orders, or do you mean that there is a group A who should receive a certain set of questions and group B who should receive a second set of questions?
Clara, come on.
The latter. So, so you want to conduct an experiment. There are 2 groups, and maybe you present different informations to different groups, and then maybe they fill out the same survey, but you want to have an option of randomly assigning them into one of the 2 groups.
Yes, there is that option. So you go to Project Home or Project Setup, and there is a randomization module, but it is here. I have not used the randomization module before, but it allows you, or whatever. So if I distribute the survey, it will randomly assign people to different groups, I believe. But you have to then make different templates for each group, and it will allow you to implement a defined randomized module within your project to randomize the subjects. It does not let you randomize any of the ordering of scales or surveys, which I think is a major limitation of REDCAP. But if you want to say, you know, group A will get survey 1, 2, and 5, and group B will get survey 1, 2, and 4, you can do that with this randomization module. Does that answer your question there? Yeah.
Yes, it does.
In terms of branching logic, yes, absolutely. So if I could say, let's do this one. The branching logic, again, the syntax will be whatever the variable is in brackets. When does your voice hurt? And then you have to do response, and again, the numerical value of whatever the response is. So that's why these numbers are so important, and it'll tell you this is a valid syntax or not. Down here you can click update and close. Alternatively, that is a lot harder to remember unless you know off the top of your head. So this drag and drop logic builder is actually really nice too. So if I want to say, whenever someone says, and you can see whatever the response is now. So if a variable voice hurting 2, if they say never, well, I want to drag that over, and then this question will only appear whenever there's this. Or you can do any of the true. So if they say never or sometimes, if they choose either of those options, then they'll see this question. Otherwise, they have to select both of those options, which is not physically possible in this survey. I like to do this for screening questionnaires, So going back to my dissertation, how I set that up is I have a screening questionnaire. So they have to say that they don't have a history of these disorders, and only then, if they have a right set of responses, can they move on in the survey, or as well as I ask about singing history. And so I say, do you sing? And if they say yes, then they get asked further questions about their singing. But if they say no, then they don't see any of these questions. Now you will see them if you click preview, you still see all of the questions, but that's why you have to test it as a participant in order to make sure that they're seeing what you want them to see or don't want them to see. So branching logic, yes, super helpful. Great, what other questions?
So can you, this is from Caroline, can you hide the total from the user going back to the surveys?
The total
Score.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, great. We're hopping around and that's awesome. Yeah, that's fine. So these action tags are really helpful for that. I only use a handful of them. Sorry, I don't like this editor. If you click this action tag button, it'll tell you what all the options are. Calculate date it can be helpful for like figuring out what the date is for something. Character default, download count. Default is good for, I can't think of an example, but if you were to say like, enter in your first name, and then, you know, when you're filling out an online survey, in the text box, it'll say like first name in like gray lettering. That's what you can do, is you can click default. So you put the default value, whatever you want it to show, like as an example. And then whenever the participant clicks to go enter in the information, the field will become blank, but it like gives them an example option. The hidden is what will prevent the participant from seeing. Now, there are several different forms of hidden, which is just a quirk of REDCAP, I guess, or REDCAP is so flexible, they have to have all these different options. If you click hidden, it will hide it from the survey page, the data entry form, and the mobile app, meaning if you are trying to enter in information as a researcher and you want to transfer this into REDCAP, you won't actually see that total, but I personally don't feel is very helpful. Like as a researcher, I want to make sure that the questions add up to what I think they should add up to. But if I want to say hidden on the form, it will only be hidden on the data entry form. Again, not helpful for a researcher, but if you do hidden survey, this will say, oh, if there's a person filling out this form as a survey, it will not show up in the survey item. So I've used that. And then I've also done options where is it? Next choice, placeholder, read only. So I like to use this one for determining someone's age. So branch, go here because I already had it written out. If you wanted to, I don't like asking people their age because they usually mess it up, I feel like. So I'll say like, enter in your date of birth. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. And so I could have one option that's a text box that will say, please enter in your date of birth. And now in a calculated field, I could then say, all right, I want to round down whatever the difference between their date of birth, whatever their response is in this variable, from today based on years. And this is an equation in a calculated box. But then within that calculated box, I put read only. And so they can't actually edit their age, but it'll show, hey, you're 31 years old. And they're not allowed to edit it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Got it.
So yes, you can calculate, you can do the hidden survey. That way they don't know what their score is, but you'll see when you export the data, it'll already be there. Wonderful questions. What other questions?
Can you use REDCAP for thematic analysis and coding?
Yes, but I think that would be a little challenging unless you know what your thematic categories are ahead of time, right? Yeah, if you wanted to use it as like a storage management thing, yes, you could. So like if I were to paste in, going back to this, already did this one here, consent form. If I had an example like descriptive, a paragraph text where I would say paste response from participants and participant response, save, and then I could have a separate, again, like matrix of fields. So if I know ahead of time, so theme 1 would be whatever theme 1, 2 is theme 2, 3 would be theme 3, and then I could say response contains. Here I have to do a group name, and this would allow whenever I'm entering. Oh, sorry. The other thing is you would want to do multiple answer checkbox here, and that would allow. So whenever I paste in the response from a participant, I could say, yes, it has theme 1 and theme 3, and then click save, go to record number 2, paste in the response from participants. This one contains only theme 2, click save and exit. Then click add new record, and so on and so forth. But again, I feel like that would be challenging unless you know your themes ahead of time. Alternatively, because you're not floating it as a survey, you don't necessarily need to move it to production status. So you could then add in a new theme. You're like, oh, wow, this new participant gave us a 4th theme we hadn't seen before. I could go in and then add, this one has theme 4, and it'll appear as an option on these previous records, but it won't be checked because it wasn't there whenever I was entering that information. So if you were using it only for an internal thematic analysis, you could do that, I guess. But yeah, I'm also I'm not an expert on thematic analysis, so that might not even be how you go about doing it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So yeah, continue, but I'm just wondering, we said that we would talk about it offline, but I'm just wondering, people may have this question too about, do you do one big database, or do you do like patient cohort, like separate databases?
Let me do one more important thing, and
Yes.
then we'll go to that discussion, because this is kind of the other area where I see a lot of issues that come up. So voice scale, anxiety scale, I have to import. Oh, here's an example. You can, if you have a file from a previously loaded thing, I can upload that zip file. So I will browse really quickly, go to my dissertation. I have data, I have measures, and then I have an anxiety measure, and I have already, this is a REDCap zip file. I upload it. Bam, that's the severity measure of generalized anxiety and disorders in adults. I can delete this one. And now, because I've already created this in one form, I have now, it already exists. I don't have to make all the items, all of the variable names, all of the must provide value, everything transferred over smoothly. So once you create a form, if it's going to be consistent across all participants, or like across different projects rather, you can just drop it in. But if you have to make a change where you're like, oh, I actually don't like this question, I'm going to get rid of it, you have to do that on all the ones where it's created. They're not linked together or anything. All that to say, that was an example of this, but now I want to enable this as a survey and survey queue. You have two options, because right now, if I want to distribute this survey to someone, I go to survey distribution tools, I copy this link, and this is the link you can give to anyone. Anyone who has this link will be able to take the survey. I fill it out. Yes, I want to participate. This was, just example data. I click submit, and oh, survey's over, because I haven't set up REDCap to go from this first page to the next page to the next page. You have two options where you could do. I actually don't like this one option, so I never use it. There is the ability to do auto, I go to survey settings. You could do auto start, which is auto continue to the next survey. You choose that, and then it will say here, this little green arrow gets added. So now it knows when this one's done, go to the next one. I don't like that though, because that's not, it's just whatever. Once that one's done, they're going to go to the next form. And that's okay if you know every single participant should fill out every single form, but that kind of limits your flexibility, because what I've done here in my dissertation is I have a screening questionnaire. If depending on their responses to the screening questionnaire and they don't qualify, I have a separate page that is not eligible. And so I can just set it custom so that in the survey queue, that depending on their responses here, they just get shot down to the not eligible page. Or if they are on the consent page and they say, I don't want to participate, and they click submit, well, now they gotta, oh, well, you didn't consent. So this is like, thank you for your time, and so on and so forth. You don't have that flexibility whenever it's just gonna auto start to the next one. So I don't like using auto start for that reason. And instead what I do, let me undo that one, is you go to survey queue, and that is where you'll edit this, and you want to keep the hidden queue, or the queue hidden from participants. So that page you saw here, or it'll basically list out every page if they don't or if they don't meet the requirement to move on to the next survey automatically. But I'll activate the voice scale, and you have to activate for the anxiety one. And so I could either say, once the consent form is complete, and then I want to auto start. And then once the voice scale is complete, I will auto start the anxiety scale, like that. Alternatively, you can then use the same branching logic. So if I wanted to say age is over 25, I only want participants over 25, and there is an error in that syntax. Because I don't have age as a variable, that would be why. But something like this would allow you to say they have to complete the consent form, and whenever they're, whatever the variables are, then they move on to the voice scale. And so that's how I've set it up, so that I have flexibility to control who sees what. And this is important to answer your question, Jackie, about do we do one survey or do we do multiple options? So I made this schematic here of, this is how it could kind of look like, is if you have a traditional REDCAP survey, again, you have a project. So each item, you can have, branching logic or the survey queue. So if you ask, do you sing, and they say yes, well, now they're going to see the singing VHI page. If they say no, then they skip that page and they go on to issues related to coughing, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you have one single unified database, you would have a question at the very beginning of like, what type of patient is this? And so the clinician would use a tablet or the laptop, go to the URL, and the clinician would have to say what patient population does this person belong to. And then when they say voice, then they get the VHI 10 and PS 10. If this is fluency, they get the OASIS, the this, the that, right? And so then everything would be unified. However, that would be one giant database, because participant 1 was a voice patient, participant 2 was a fluency patient, participant 3 was a cough patient, or whatever. Well, all of these variables are going to be contained within that database. So even though participant 2 was a fluency patient, they're going to have a bunch of blank responses for the VHI-10, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's just when you go to export and analyze the data, you're going to have a spreadsheet that's 700 lines long, and you only care about 50 lines.
Right. Okay.
And you can filter that out, but again, it's like you can only export the entire database, or that's it. Like you don't have you would have to export everything and then filter out based from there.
All right.
And this would be helpful too if I want everyone to have the PSS. Well, I could do that branching logic and say, okay, once you finish this, I have one scale, the PSS 10, that everyone takes. It's all within the same. It's all within the same option, and each one could be, these would be fluency questions. These would be this. This is the question that gets asked to everyone. Or The other option would be to do a multiple diagnosis specific database where there would be a separate URL. So you would have, you know, I use this because I have a ton of projects open here, but this would be the fluency database. This would be the you know, voice database. This would be the coughing database, and each one would have their own specific URL associated with it. And then, you know, a clinician, you could either have a Google Drive document where it says like, click here for if it's a voice patient, click here if it's a fluency patient, and then the clinician goes to the Google form, clicks on the URL, and then that survey opens, and then they can hand it off or something like that. That allows you to have different information. Maybe you have a child who stutters and adults who stutter. Well, the demographic information you're going to ask them would vary, right? So you could tailor the demographic questionnaires, whereas you don't necessarily have that flexibility with a single unified database. Why are we asking, you know, a 7-year-old who's stuttering how much he drinks? Like, that's just not a relevant question.
Yeah. Right.
Granted, you could then have 17 different demographic forms, and then, but again, see, it gets really complicated whenever, oh, and also with that, you can't have just one age variable, because demographic form for stuttering would have an age, but then you have to label that variable something else, because then the voice disorder demographic questionnaire would also ask them age, but because they're within the same project, you can't use the same variable name.
Okay.
Alternatively, you could have it where it's separate databases, and the challenge then would be, oh, we just had such a great question. We should ask people about their history of this. Let's add it to the voice disorder database, but then we forget to add it to the cough database, and now we're going to look across these voice and upper airway patients, and oh, there's 50 people we never updated that question, or we never added that question. So it's more things to keep track of if it's multiple things like this. But this also allows you, I only care about children who stutter right now for this research study. I can just export all of these data, and then I don't have to worry about all the other information. So there are pros and cons to both. I actually don't have a recommendation. It's just the one unified database is going to get really messy, and there's going to be a lot of branching logic and a more likelihood of error that way. But also, if you have separate ones, you're more likely to not add the information, or to because you have multiple surveys to keep track of. There's really pros and cons on both sides.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No more questions. We just have 10 minutes. I don't know if you were going to talk about this, but can you show us downloading data to look at the data in the data import or data export tools, and just how you can take a little quick look-see,
Yeah, absolutely. So I have, I think I have data baseline project. Yeah. So again, I went through, and this was me testing. I found an error on this page. I went and fixed that error. I went and created a new form, and I found an error. I went back and did it. So I mean, I cannot overemphasize test, and don't even test to see if it works. Actively try to break the survey, because that's how you're going to find all these flaws. But let me go back to one that has actual data on it. So if I wanted to just do a quick little look-see to see how things are going, I can click this data export reports and sets, the same but for both of them actually. So if I click view report, it will load all of it gives you the data file or the data frame in the web browser, and then you could download it here. Or if I click export data, I could say I want the raw or label data. Now, back to each response from each item has a number associated with it, followed by then a comma, followed by what the text the participant sees. The raw data will be just the numbers, and so this is really helpful. But then there might be categories where response 7 is meaningless. I need to know what the text is, and then you'd want to use the label option. The issue with the label option is if we have a question where there's no label here, then the data you export is going to be empty cells. And I've run into this multiple times where I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to know about a category for this question, and then I'm like, why is there so many missing responses? And it's because there wasn't something written there. So it's a little frustrating with the raw data. Then you just have to keep in track of what numbers go with what thing. Here you can remove identifier fields, or if there's a text field that's not valid. So these are good, if you want to do some data analysis and you don't want to store PHI on your computer, you could remove all the identifier fields and it's now de-identified.
Yep.
I do recommend this timestamp field just so you can keep track of like how long it took a person to finish a survey and stuff. But you then export the data there, you click export and you download that file. If you wanted to just do a quick little like look-see-loo, like I want to see how this is the depression measure. My appetite was poor. There's 25 missing responses. Most people are saying not at all. So I can item by item see what the variables are. REDCAP will not specifically give you a sum score unless you make a calculated field where it would say, again, at the end here, you could have something where it'd be like, what's it called? CESD, depression measure, total score, and you could hide that field from participants so the participants don't actually see it. But then when you click pull up the stats, it will calculate like the average responses here in that field. So this just allows you to like look at things and make sure it's looking the way you want to. You can't really do any analyses within REDCAP. If you need a preliminary data or a preliminary image to look at the distribution, click download image, it'll pull this here. But yeah, that's how you export data and just kind of look at things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
What other questions do y'all have?
I have a question. So with the UPMC database that was developed that you caught, because you showed us how to copy paste, was that copy and pasted into something, please say it was, into a test?
What do you mean into a test?
To a test project. So 2 years ago, maybe I wanted to look at X, Y, and Z, but now it's copy and pasted because there are tons of questionnaires, but now I've got all these other questionnaires and I don't want this questionnaire. So can I manipulate it basically?
Yeah. It's not in production status. So nothing is in production status. So yeah, it's there and all the items that you want. So, but yeah, what other?
Any other questions with the group?
Hi, this is Clara. I have a question that I'm not sure you would be able to answer. They're sort of more specific, I think, to Carlow. So I guess the first question is, how do we get access to REDCAP?
Yeah, I can tell you that.
Okay.
Clara, you can, let me just share my screen with you. Share. Basically go to Isadora and put in REDCAP, and you will come to a screen that says to gain access to REDCAP, please email Jack at help, our help@carlow.edu, and say that you want access, and it takes about 2 to 3 days, and then he will give you access. And when you put in Isadora REDCAP, it'll also say click here to access REDCAP. So it's super simple. It just takes a couple of days.
Okay.
And also, at least for us, I don't know, I'm assuming it might be the same, is it'll ask you if you want to have the ability to create projects, and you'll want to say yes if you are planning on creating projects. But for like a research assistant who isn't going to be creating a separate database, they can say no to that question, and that just limits they won't start a new project basically.
Okay, great. So I guess the other question is, and this I'm guessing the answer is no, and it might be a CTRL question, but I was wondering if there's Brightspace integration.
You say white space?
Brightspace, it's our LMS.
D2L is another.
Yeah, like for example, if I wanted students to use it for something and I just want to know if they did it or not, right? Something like that, where it just goes directly to Brightspace. Like 1 or 0, they completed or did not complete.
I don't know of any link between REDCAP and our current LMS.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
So-
That's what I thought. I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah,
just
I don't
in
think so.
case.
You can set up alerts and notifications. So like I have it set up so every time someone participates after a certain threshold in the survey, I get an email so I know like, hey, someone participated. And in that email, you could have like if they enter in their name, like the student's name is Johnny. In the email sent to you, you can say, tell me the name in the email. So you say, Johnny completed this assignment, or like what, like you could have REDCap do that manually, but I don't know about integration.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Pamela Twist has a question concerning IRB. When you started, the screen showed the need for an IRB number. If we set up a survey without an IRB number, which we want to do all of REDCap before, can we print the survey to submit with our IRB?
Yes. So when you go to the designer page, because the IRB will want to know all the questionnaires, you can click PDF right here. It'll ask you where you want to download it, and it is a PDF version of the questionnaire exactly as it would appear. And so you can, I just always, in the IRB, it has like a attached file here section. I just plop all the surveys in there.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I want to be respectful of everyone's times. It's 1 o'clock, so thank you, Brett. This is awesome, and thank you for the download that you're going to send us. Send me, and then I'll figure out where to put it so people can get it. Yeah, thanks very much.
Well, yeah, my pleasure. Thanks to everyone, and I hope this was helpful. So.
Okay. All right. See you. And Brett, I'm going to
Yep.
talk to you offline. Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Sounds good. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.